Este programa contém dramatizações de eventos reais e não se destina a público jovem. Alguns nomes foram alterados para proteger os inocentes.
A millionaire and his family were executed in their own home. And for 3 years, the murders went unsolved until a 30-year-old box of bullets and some iridescent fibers revealed the ultimate betrayal. The beach house at Pajaro Dunes in Northern California. On weekends and holidays, it was the perfect getaway for the Yule family. The family patriarch Dale was an extremely wealthy man who made his fortune selling airplanes.
He was quite successful because he's very outgoing, very personable, convincing, and he'd go out on these ranches and sell farmers these airplanes, land in their field, sell them planes, and then teach them how to fly.
Dale and his wife, Glee, had been happily married for 31 years. Their 24-year-old daughter, Tiffany, was a graduate student in accounting.
Tiffany, very sweet girl by all accounts. She seemed to do well in school, and everybody loved her.
Their 21-year-old son, Dana, was a business major at Santa Clara University.
Dana was a very precocious child, very smart, almost too intelligent. I heard that once upon a time his IQ was 165, which is extremely high.
In 1992, after spending the Easter holiday at Pajaro Dunes, Dale, Glee, and their daughter Tiffany returned home to Fresno. 2 days later, the Yule's housekeeper tried to enter the home and sensed trouble. The security alarm was turned off, yet the doors were locked. Inside, she found Dale, Glee, and Tiffany dead from gunshot wounds.
The thing that I recall most about the Yule home from the murders is the photograph of Glee Yule laying on her back in the den. She had a look of fright on her face, even in death.
I've never seen a house that severely ransacked by any burglar I've ever dealt with. And I worked burglary before I worked homicide.
Jewelry was missing from the home, and Dale Yule's wallet was empty. But there were no signs of forced entry.
How did somebody get in here, turn off the alarm, because it didn't ring at the alarm company or the police department?
All three were shot with a 9mm weapon while bringing their luggage in from the beach house on Sunday night.
So those tragic things, your life is great 1 second, and a millisecond later you're gone.
Dana Yule was fortunate. He avoided the ambush since he was having dinner with his girlfriend and her family that night, 160 miles away.
He began dating Monica Zent, an FBI agent's daughter. At the time of the murders, Dana Yule was with the family, and his alibi was FBI agent John Zent.
Investigators found an open box of 9mm ammunition in the master bedroom. And they also found very unusual fibers on the victims.
They had some fluorescent fibers that glowed under the ultraviolet light in the dark, and some rubbery stuff that I didn't have a clue as to what it was, except it appeared to be rubber.
In their search for suspects, investigators thought that a business associate or rival may have wanted Dale Yule dead. Before Dale acquired his business, the company was allegedly involved in some criminal activity.
He took over the dealership from the former owner, who had gotten into a little bit of legal difficulty with marijuana smuggling.
Or Glee Yule might have been the target.
Glee Yule had worked for the CIA at one time. The CIA doesn't tell you a whole lot, but they did acknowledge the fact she did work for him.
With talk of marijuana smuggling and CIA connections, investigators knew these murders would be difficult to solve. cold-blooded murder of millionaire Dale Ewell, his wife Glee, and daughter Tiffany was big news in Fresno, California.
Fresno's had some big homicide cases over the years, but I would venture to say this is probably one of the biggest ones of the century.
Investigators suspected that the Ewells were killed on Sunday night when they returned from the beach house. Glee and Tiffany Ewell drove back separately and were killed first. Dale Ewell got home about a half hour later.
Whomever had killed his wife and daughter remained in the house for perhaps another half hour. Why would this killer or killers, why would they remain in the home for a half hour or so after they had gunned down two people?
But that's apparently what happened. Dale was shot in the back of his head as he entered the house.
Just stunned, I just became numb. Just could not understand or believe or contemplate such a thing.
All three were killed with a 9mm weapon.
These people were essentially ambushed. It was a scene of pure evil. I don't think there's any other way to explain it. You can't try to say, oh, well, these people are insane, or the perpetrator's insane, or anything like that. The perpetrator in this case was just purely evil.
The Ewell's son Dana had an airtight alibi, as did everyone who had keys to the house. Investigators found an open box of 9mm ammunition in the Ewell's bedroom. Was this the ammunition used by the killer? The 9mm bullets retrieved from the bodies had been damaged on impact, but the back end of each bullet, known as the heel, was intact.
The impressions on there had nothing to do with their bullets being fired. It was something that occurred during manufacture and was something that I hadn't seen before.
So Alan Boudreau removed the casing from an unfired bullet and compared it to the heels of the bullets from the victims. The tool marks were the same.
These bullets, the murder bullets, came from this box of ammunition.
An identification number on the box indicated the bullets were made in 1971. And a price sticker on the box revealed it was purchased at a local hardware store. When police called the hardware store, the owner said he still had all his sales receipts, even the ones from 30 years ago.
And they found the receipt for that ammunition made out to Dale Ewell.
Proof that Dale Ewell and his family were killed with his own ammunition.
It had to be somebody that knew enough about that family to know that there was a box of 9mm ammo in Dad's bedroom, which meant it was an inside job of some sort.
And the bullets looked like they had been fired through more than just the barrel of a gun.
These bullets went through something that marked them, unlike any normal gun barrel. And it could be a flash suppressor, sound suppressor, silencer, something along that line.
What robber would come to a crime scene with a silencer on a gun?
Could it have been a hitman?
Estamos apresentando Medical Detectives.
The forensic evidence gathered at the Ewell family home painted a bizarre picture of how Dale Ewell, his wife, and 24-year-old daughter were killed. Someone with a house key turned off the security alarm and murdered them with a 9mm weapon using ammunition belonging to the victim, Dale Ewell. It looked like a botched robbery. Some money and jewelry were missing, and the only forensic evidence was the bullets and the yellow luminescent fibers.
From the scientific end of the investigation, what I had to work with was relatively little.
The only remaining family member, the Ewell's 21-year-old son Dana, had a rock-solid alibi. He was with his girlfriend and her family.
There really was never any question about his alibi where he was on Easter Sunday when his parents were being killed.
What innocent guy gets an attorney and wants us to contact the attorney to contact him just to get information on their parents or their sister? That made no sense.
Dana Ewell also had a clear motive. He was the beneficiary of his parents' estate.
Dana Ewell stood to inherit approximately $8 million. It would have been approximately $4 million had his sister not also been murdered.
Dana was a prim and proper type kid, went to class with his $200 shirt and his $100 tie that he let everybody know that's what it cost.
He also made some unusual inquiries after the murders.
Dana Ewell called me at the coroner's office and interrogated me as to the progress of the autopsy, what we'd found, and so forth.
It is really unusual for some close family member to call and ask for the details of the case in the way he did.
And investigators learned that Dana had some character flaws. Apparently, he had plagiarized a term paper in his business ethics class and failed the course. Investigators also learned that Dana was a loner. His only friend was his former college roommate, Joel Radovsich, so they decided to give him a call.
First thing Joel said upon being phoned by Detective Souza was, "Are you going to arrest me?" It was an unusual thing to say.
So unusual that police put him under surveillance and found that he didn't use the telephone in his apartment. Instead, he'd use a payphone nearby.
They had two payphones mounted on the outside exterior wall of the 7-Eleven store. He would look down at his waist level and then dial a number. We deducted the fact that he was looking at a pager.
An undercover officer positioned himself within earshot.
I don't want no f***ing stock options. I want $250,000, and I want it now.
Radovsich demanded $250,000 and also wanted advice on how to invest it.
Joel was a world of his own. Like no one was around him. Only thing they were talking about was their investments and where they were going to invest the money.
According to phone records, Joel was talking to Dana Ewell. A check of Joel's financial records indicated that he was spending freely, despite not having a job.
He was taking helicopter flight lessons at the Long Beach airport, some of which cost $500 an hour. No job, no source of income, and he's spending this kind of money.
They found that the checks for some $5,600 odd for Joel's lessons had been paid by Dana directly. This was a very curious event. This was something that led directly to a financial link between the two suspects.
And Joel Radovsich purchased several very suspicious items prior to the murders.
During a surveil of Joel Radovsich, the detectives found that Joel had ordered books from a publisher in Boulder, Colorado. And in turn, he had these books shipped to a man named Jack Ponce.
One of those books described how to make a homemade silencer. A background check revealed Jack Ponce was a 23-year-old law student and Joel Radovsich's lifelong friend. Records indicated that Ponce owned a 9mm semi-automatic weapon.
Jack Ponce said initially that the weapon had been purchased for the purpose of shooting possums in his attic. Investigators found the whole possum shooting scenario a bit hard to swallow.
During police questioning, Ponce denied any involvement in the Ewell murders and said his 9mm gun had been stolen.
We've probably heard that story a few times in our career.
This murder investigation had been complicated and time-consuming. By this time, 3 years had passed, and Dana Ewell told everyone who would listen that detectives John Souza and Chris Curtis were too inept to solve the case.
Dana Ewell, he would call us Mutt and Jeff and Bert and Ernie, and we weren't smart enough to find the murderer of his family.
And, Ernie Bert couldn't find a gun in a gun store.
And the only reason we had the cops' jobs is because we couldn't get no other job.
I'll be damned if some kid like that's going to make a fun of us.
Estamos apresentando Medical Detectives.
Investigators now had 3 suspects in the murder of Dale, Glee, and Tiffany Ewell. The Ewell's son, Dana, his college roommate, Joel Radisich, and Joel's friend, Jack Ponce. With a search warrant, investigators found a number of interesting items in Joel Radisich's apartment, including a half-dozen tennis balls with holes drilled through them.
I found out that the dyes that they use in these yellow and orange and purple, pink tennis balls are FDA-approved dyes because children and dogs chew on tennis balls. And it was very interesting, but I found out everything there is to know about tennis balls.
The fibers from these tennis balls were consistent with those found on the murder victims. Proof that the tennis balls were part of the homemade silencer.
Jack Ponce was arrested at a restaurant where he worked as a bartender. Joel was eventually arrested at his favorite Taco Bell, where he seemed to eat 3 times a day, every day. Dana, however, was nowhere to be found.
Radisich admitted to nothing. Jack Ponce, however, didn't want to face the death penalty, so he decided to cooperate.
He was the one of the 3 who, as the police say, rolled over. He agreed to turn evidence against Joel Radisich and Dana Ewell, tell them everything he knew.
Ponce originally told investigators that his 9mm weapon had been stolen. He now admitted he sold it to Joel Radisich for $500. A few days later, Ponce said Joel returned the gun and told him to get rid of it.
Joel told Jack that he's the one that killed the Ewell family, and he described the inside of the house, where he was, how he did, what happened, the sequence of events. And we knew all that, but it was never in the newspaper.
Ponce said he disassembled the gun, threw the parts in dumpsters, and buried the barrel in a vacant lot in Los Angeles. In an unbelievable stroke of luck, the barrel was still there.
Been there for 3 years. Surprisingly and luckily, we have an open lot in LA that stayed vacant and wasn't paved over or concreted over for 3 years.
Holes had been drilled into the gun's barrel, consistent with the information in the books that Joel Radisich ordered. Investigators dipped the barrel in a special solution to remove the mud and rust. Then attached it to a rifle and test-fired it using the same ammunition found at the crime scene. Amazingly, after 3 years in the ground, the test was conclusive.
Lo and behold, these test-fired bullets look very much like the Ewell bullets in their general character and appearance.
That was the part that contained the forensic evidence we needed to establish that weapon was used in the murder.
For prosecutors, what happened was unthinkable, but perfectly logical. After all, the evidence showed it was an inside job all along. Dana Ewell wanted his parents' money, and he did not want to wait for them to die of natural causes, and he did not want to share it with his sister either. So he hired his roommate, Joel Radisich, to kill them all. Radisich decided to use an assault rifle with a homemade silencer, reinforced with tennis balls to further reduce the noise. Dana gave Joel the house keys, the alarm code, and told him where his father kept the box of 9mm ammunition. To establish his alibi, Dana had dinner that night with his girlfriend and her father, who happened to be an FBI agent. When Glee and Tiffany came home, Radisich ambushed them. He shot Tiffany first. Then he followed Glee into another room and shot her. About a half hour later, Dale came home, and Joel was waiting. Tennis ball fibers left at the scene were consistent with the fibers found in Radovsich's home. Prosecutors believed that Glee Yule knew who was responsible.
She had met Joel before. Of the three, she's the only one that got a look at Joel, and I believe knew that her son was killing her for the estate.
Jack Fonse was given immunity in exchange for his testimony. Dana Yule eventually turned himself in, and in 1995, he and Joel Radovsich were both convicted of first-degree murder and murder for financial gain. Both are serving life in prison without parole.
I believe that the physical evidence in this case was a really big deal and probably carried the weight of the conviction.
He was an arrogant young man. He was an extremely arrogant young man that thought he was smarter. Very smart young man, don't get me wrong, but he thought he was smarter than a bunch of streetwise cops.
We weren't lax in our job. It just took a long time to put it together to get enough evidence to go to court.